Sahitya Academy Award presentation ceremony in which we have a lot going on, a lot of programs. Like, for example, today's program, there are various halls like these, where this is known as a Ganga Sabhagar. Based on the rivers of India, we have the Brahmaputra, then the Narmada, and the Krishna, Godavari, Kaveri. These are like the stages where there's an interaction between the people who write and the people who hear. So today I found it very interesting was our comics literature.
कॉमिक्स के ऊपर कॉमिक्स को याद कर आप ग्राफिक महाभारत के दो पर्व ऑप्टिक ब्लड एंड फ्लावर्स और आरण्यक जो मनोविज्ञान पारिस्थितिकीवाद और वैदिक दर्शन की लेखिका हैं 2017 में पाटिल जी को कला और साहित्य में सीमाओं का अतिक्रमण करने वाला असाधारण कार्य हेतु भारत के राष्ट्र नारी शक्ति पुरस्कार प्राप्त हुआ है, जो आप वैश्विक दर्शकों के लिए नॉन फिक्शन डिजिटल कॉमिक्स करती हैं। उस पर कॉमिक्स की एक सह संस्थापकों में कहते हैं, नॉर्मल तो राइटर्स होते नहीं हैं, लेकिन द वैनिश्ड पाथ अ ग्राफिक टैबलॉग आपकी पहली कॉमिक पुस्तक है। आप कॉमिक्स इंडिया लेबल के अंतर्गत भारत में कॉमिक्स का संपादन और प्रकाशन करते हैं। आदि प्रकाशकों के लिए कॉमिक पुस्तकों पर 2 दशकों तक पावर चक्कर एंड जर्नी इनटू द फर्नेस ऑफ हिस्ट्री, फूड एंड फार्मिंग आदि शामिल हैं। आप मैट शामिल किया गया है। भगत सिंह के जीवन पर आपका पहला ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास हुआ। आप वर्तमान में जिंदल विश्वविद्यालय के कला और वास्तुकला विद्यालय की जो 2018 में प्रकाशित हुई और आलोचकों के साथ टिंकल कॉमिक्स के समूह कला निदेशक हैं, जो कलाकारों और डिजाइनरों के साथ एक सक्रिय समूह के संरक्षक हैं, जो दुनिया भर में इस उपन्यास द इंच यू कांट स्क्रैच को बहुत सराहना मिली। और आपके ऐतिहासिक ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास आमार बारी तोमार बारी नक्सलबारी और कश्मीर की कहानी को मुख्य धारा में सफलता प्राप्त हुई। विकास सिंह ब्रांड और मार्केटिंग प्रोफेशनल हैं। आपको डाबर च्यवनप्राश, डिटॉल, स्टार न्यूज, दैनिक भास्कर और साक्षी जैसे बड़े ब्रांड बनाने और उन्हें संवारने में 25 से अधिक वर्षों का अनुभव है। आप एक TTX और कॉमिक्स कॉन स्पीकर हैं। आप कॉमिक्स के शौकीन संग्रह करता है। आपके पास 126 भाषाओं में टिंटिन कॉमिक्स के सबसे बड़े संग्रह का विश्व रिकॉर्ड है। आप कॉमिक्स फॉर चेंज पहल से जुड़े हुए हैं, जिसे कई राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार प्राप्त हैं। इस पहल का उद्देश्य सामाजिक परिवर्तन लाने के लिए कॉमिक्स की क्षमता का उपयोग करना है। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत बहुत स्वागत। ये मंच आप देख रहे हैं और
मैं बीच में हिंदी में बात करूंगी, लेकिन ज्यादातर प्रेजेंटेशन इंग्लिश में रहेगा। ओके, सो एक तो रुकने के लिए टुडे इन दिस पर्टिकुलर वेन्यू and you may want to be closer in order to just see the things better, so that's an option that you have. So our comics literature, but as you see here I have written comics as literature because once you have the Sahitya Academy hosting you as part of their programming, then clearly that whether it is literature or not has been sorted out. So now we can go on to discuss what kind of literature, what is going on, things like that. A little word about why the people that have been chosen. Now, the easiest thing for me to do as a person who also works with text and image is to gather a bunch of friends so we could all be in Delhi together. But what I have done instead is gotten people together who are as different as possible. They're so different that many of them probably absolutely will not read each other's work. We have got different politics, we come from different parts of the country. There is really a tremendous diversity here, and I feel very happy and chuffed that we could get people together of that sort. And each person has been chosen to be here for a particular role that I see that they play in the Indian comics scene. So the first I'm going to start off with is Savio. Now luckily the introductions are done, so we can just leap in. The unique distinction of having worked with Amar Chitrakatha for 30 means that he's gone from being a young artist working in the brand that basically is what comes to mind to people when they think about Indian comics, whether in India or abroad, right? So that's a pretty amazing sort of a place to be and hard place to be. This is a recent group photo featuring all of us with Savio there, also Julia Trujillo, who is from the French Institute. She's also there in the group, and we are going to be hosting a comics exhibition of Indian traditions soon. So, hovering there above all of us is the omnipresent Uncle Pai or Anant Pai. And what is very interesting for me is this person has been so iconic, and he's a product of his context and time, right? But he's legendary also. So what it is like for somebody to have worked in the shadow of him and other kind of iconic people is something that we'd like to speak about. I'm just going to show you a couple of images. We heard that Savio is responsible for having created characters like Shikari Shambhu, like Supandi, and within this panel there are people that have also done takes which are satires on Supandi, so it's kind of lovely that that is the case, right? So those who are new to the comics medium, please see the inking process and the final art left and right. There is more work over here. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, Savio, and we can then cue to some slides that you may want to ask, talk about. Now, do you have any anecdotes about what it was like for you to have joined into what was an institution when you went there to begin with? 31 years ago, Amar Chitra Katha, and what it was like. Is there, now this is a very large panel. I could actually have talked to any one of you for 60 minutes and a half flat. But we're going to have to keep the answers concise, so don't think I'm bullying you if I'm moving questions ahead. It's just because I want everybody to get a chance, right? Go ahead, please.
So, hello. My journey started when I was around 22, 23, and I'm not a trained artist. I've not been to an art school, but I'm a trained advertising personnel. I worked in advertising as a copywriter, and drawing was my hobby. So one fine day when I saw an ad in the newspaper which said that Tinkle needed a comic book artist, that's when I actually approached Uncle Pai, and I showed him some of my cartoons, and he loved them so much. This was in '92. And that began my journey as a cartoonist for Tinkle. I freelanced with Tinkle for 3 years as a cartoonist, and of course I worked full-time as a copywriter. Around '94, when I went to wish Uncle Pai Happy New Year, it was 31st of December, and he asked me, what are you doing nowadays? I said, I'm working as a full-time copywriter and a part-time cartoonist. So he said, what do you like best? And I said, I like to draw. Then he said, I'll give you a New Year's gift. So my job is actually a New Year's gift for me. So I guess that's the day I actually stopped working, because then I was passionately doing what I really love to do.
Fantastic.
So that's been my beginning with him.
Now, Amar Chitra Katha being what it is almost a kind of a brand that parents approve of. It's the kind of role that Sudha Murthy occupies probably. The parents desperately want children to read it. Now whether the children want to or not is a separate matter. So in your case, how has the tightrope been for you to balance keeping up the tradition and speaking to a very, very differently wired generation? Because I think the leap between the people who are now teenagers or underneath at this point and what we were, I think it's been a very large shift. So what has it been like for you as somebody who is programming the content?
So when we look at content which Amar Chitra Katha has been creating over the years, it has been appealing to the families. We have been telling the stories of India. And whenever we work on any of the titles, any of our content that we put out, we see to it there's a lot of research which goes into it before we actually start working on the comics. Reason being that, like they always say, a legacy comes with a huge burden of expectations. And for us, it is that burden that we are now the current, the legacy, it's on our shoulders to carry this forward. So we say to it that whatever we put it out, is thoroughly researched. There's a certain culture of writing that we follow, and there's a certain way that we put out our comics.
Can I butt in here with the thing? I heard that the kind of research that goes into a title is 2 years. Now we are talking about these slim little comics which have 2 years of research in them. But more importantly, I know that the language that you speak of, that you have a certain tonality. Now Uncle Pai and gang they're very proper, right? Now I don't know whether that is something you follow or whether even with that you've had a shift with...
No, so exactly, we do follow the grammar which is correct in the sense we follow the British English. We don't use any slangs. We also cater to, so our audience is somebody who's 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, and that's the vast and the group of people who actually read Amar Chitra Katha. It's across the length and breadth of India. So when we go out and when we meet a lot of young parents who tell us that they grew up reading Amar Chitrakatha and they want to pass on the legacy to their children, and that is something which we feel very honored and responsible, saying that, you know, okay, this is a brand that we have been entitled to, like, you know, handle with a lot of care. So whatever we do, like I was talking about the research that we did a title on the Paramvir Chakra awardees. Now that took us almost 3 years because we were covering all the awardees right from 1947-48 war to the Kargil war. So right from there to today, to the latest wars that we had, the research which took us into getting the costumes right, the artillery, you know, all of that was a mammoth task.
But tell me one thing, there is in a brand that is trying to keep up with the times a lot of pressure to keep mutating, to basically shape shift. So I know that you all have gone digital, I know that you all have come up with new characters, but have they managed to stick like the Supandis? Like Supandi has a special relationship with me because after watching Demi Moore in Ghost, I got a haircut which I thought looked like Demi Moore, but I was informed I looked like Supandi. So that followed me through my teenage years. And I was wondering about whether some of the new things that you have created have stuck like some of the old things that...
So Supandi, of course, is one of the most popular characters, and we always believe that you cannot restrict these characters to the pages in the comic. They have to move out, and that is where these characters are now moving out. We're getting into the digital space, of course. We're getting into animation. We're getting into films.
Successfully?
Yes. So Supandi is going to be launched very soon by the end of this month. Sorry, a couple of months from now. It's going to be on YouTube. So the life of these characters and the life of everything that we create in Amar Chitrakatha and Twinkle has to move on. That is but obvious that we should be doing.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next person over here, we have Vikas Singh. Now, Vikas Singh is special, and it's somebody that is a recent acquaintance. You know that he has a life outside of comics, brand and marketing professional, etc. But he is what they refer to as a panapictographist, which is a fabulous way of saying somebody who collects comic books. Okay? And he's also a Tintinologist. All of us are mostly Tintinophiles, but he's a Tintinologist also. And it's, for me, what is very special is across the board, India is not a very archival culture. The subcontinent is very bad about taking care of its own histories, regardless of what those histories are, right? So the idea of archives, of museum mentality, of holding on to stuff, this is something that is quite scarce, and it is something that we as people who are trying to put together an exhibition have recognized just how scanty it is. So I wanted to ask you that this identity of being a collector has not been developed to the way it has in the West, and the idea of communities of collectors of very, very specific stuff does not really exist, and I'm sure you're really interacting with a global community for what you do. I wanted to ask you what inspired you to start collecting in the way that you do, and to what end? Like what started you off, and kya aapka aim tha in doing this?
See, unfortunately in India, now, whatever you do, if you have a hobby, the first thing your parent or your friends are going to ask, kya fayda hai? What is the cost? Now, Tintin had a very interesting story. I'll quickly narrate. There was once a souvenir sheet that was brought out by Belgium. I collect stamps also. It had 24 images of 24 albums of Tintin, all in different languages. So I said, why not collect each of this album so that, you know, along with your stamps, you can exhibit that also. So those were the first 24 comics, different languages that I first picked up. Now there is a forum called Tintinologist, like what Amrita just said. Now you become a member only if you bring out one fact of Tintin that nobody in the world knows.
Oh really?
So it gets certified.
Oh.
Now in Tintin in Tibet, Tintin, those of you who would have read Tintin would know, he gets a letter in which they say that the Chang is dead, and there is a postmark on that. Those stamps are actual stamps that were brought out by Hong Kong Post.
Oh,
now the moment I discovered that and I was certified as a Tintinologist, then that somebody got back and said, why don't you collect that, the first one which was in Chinese, that was banned. China banned because it's called, the Chinese language is called Tintin in Chinese Tibet. So I purchased that, and that's how, you know, it just...
How old were you when all of this was going on? Clearly beyond your parents' control.
Yeah, I started working, so...
Okay, alright.
So then, you know, you start getting other people, you start meeting others, they help you grow, and then slowly the collection grows. In fact, there are a few, like there is a Tintin in Bulgarian of which only 16 copies exist in the world because rest were all destroyed. It had wrong translation in some places. Then there's one of which only 50 copies have been printed. And today, this 126 languages, I am the only one in the whole world who has that.
I have.
So there's one which has just come up with what you have said. It's a Tintin in Ukrainian language. Now, Ukraine is at war, so it's very difficult to get a copy of that, but I've been looking for it. So, it just grows with you, and then there is no end, because once you get into this...
So there is no end to it. There is no means to an end of it.
It's a very dangerous business.
I see. Okay.
And a very costly one.
Absolutely, I want to go to the other aspects of your collection, but with regard to Tintin, one question is, what do you think is the reason why kids in India were relating so hard to these things? I mean, Tintin to ek baat hai, but like Asterix and all, like what is going on? Like there are many people in West Bengal who believe that Tintin was created by a Bengali. You know, so what is the scene? What is your understanding?
Simplicity. See, today, the world. I really don't appreciate this word graphic novel. There's nothing like a graphic novel. It's a comics basically.
यहाँ पे झगड़ा चला तो गया.
It's suddenly become a buzzword, graphic novel. If you look at Tintin, it's the simplicity of the drawing. It's just line drawing. And yet with that line drawing, Hergé could give a variety of expression, not just to Tintin, but to his dog also. And the reason they became very popular, especially in India, was because you could travel the world with Tintin.
Beautiful.
You can go to Switzerland, you can go to Peru, you can go to Sri Lanka, you can go to India. I mean, for us it's not a big deal, but for Europeans it's a big deal. So, you travel the world, and every time you read Tintin, every time, I bet you will find something new. Asterix is altogether very different. You are in stress, you read one page of Asterix, and I guarantee that stress will go away. Look at the way he has drawn everything, whether the board is running away because he's going to be killed, or the way dogmatics cries when a tree is fed. Every single detail which is there in the Asterix comic, I mean, it will take away your stress.
Now, it must be told to the people in this audience that Tintin allows you to go places, but our friend Vikas has actually gone places following Tintin around on what are known as Tintin trails, jiske ek do photos hai, where different things that appear in Tintin are visited. These are across countries. I will not dwell upon it right now. There are other things I need to ask you first, but there is that, right? Now, one other fascinating feature of Vikas's collection, and that especially resonates with me, is that he has an extraordinary collection of Hindi comics. And ऐसे बहुत सारे comics, there was a grand golden age of these Hindi yarn, which if I even look at comics by the same publishers today, don't have the same jadoo about them. What has been your observation about Hindi comics that you've gathered?
Bahadur was India's first superhero. And
that was my favorite.
I would consider Bahadur to be one of the biggest example of Hindi literature. Because if you go through that period, that era, and the things that a normal citizen could do, it's all there in Bahadur. And for the first time, live-in relationship, now it's become very common, the buzzword. But if you see the relationship between Bela and Bahadur, in the comics it was a live-in relationship. The way he was dressed up, saffron and green. So there were a lot of, and this entire series was actually inspired by a book called Abhishek Chambal. It was written by Jaya Bahadur's father. So, and there are very few collectors who actually were collecting Bahadur comics. I mean, there were few here and there. So I said that, why not start collecting them? It took me 15, 16 years. Now, one interesting question you asked, why India, Hindi comics did not go the way the Western has. That's what I was telling Savio. Three things. One, we go wrong with marketing. See, the market for comics is not the children. You make money only when you market it to age group 35 to 55.
Wow.
That's where, a single panel of Tintin gets sold for, 3 crores, 3.5 crores. You don't get that much of money from a youth. That's one. Second is, nobody is able to build a brand. I mean, you have a lot of publishers in comics today. We know what is happening with the Raj Comics. I will not dwell on how the brothers are fighting it out. Nobody is trying to make a brand. You first make a brand, then you look at merchandising. Here, one comic comes out, you have 6 variants. Who will buy a comic with 6 variant covers if there is no demand for the first comic itself? And then the push to merchandise. Merchandise will follow only when the brand is there. Third is the storyline. Of late, we are making the storylines very, very complex. If you read some of the new ones which have come up, they have become so complex, as if somebody is trying to give a lot of gyan in that. If you make something very don't try to copy
Actually,
what
that's
Watchman has
something.
done.
No, that's actually something very interesting you're saying, because when you analyze Tintin, you also had a feeling that it is the simplicity that is sticky in your analysis, right? This is fantastic, and hopefully in the Q&A we'll come back to this. I have one last question to ask you. What are the technical difficulties? Now, I visited another kindred spirit of yours in Bangalore called Mr. Arun Prasad. And unka ghar to bhaiya, it's like kind of Aladdin ka cave. Like, it's insane how many comics he's got. Kuch Satyajit Ray ne kiya hua cover, kuch ye, kuch wo, kuch like unbelievable stuff that was being done before Amar Chitra Katha. Unbelievable. Basically, I don't know how his family has not thrown him out, because I think the comics are like pushing the family out of the house, So I wanted to ask you about the technicalities of what it means to archive paper material in the kind of ruthless weather conditions that exist in India. Yes?
See, I learned a lot from Arun. He's a very good friend, and that's what is good about this small community of collectors. But 2-3 things you need to keep in mind. Obviously, it has to be with a proper backing card, which has to be acid free, because most of what is printed in this, the acidic content is very high. And second is you have to store them very carefully and not read them more often. So better to create a PDF.
Don't expect to borrow anything from this man.
10 will only come if there is not a single amount of crease on that, which is like brand new, which is impossible. Most comics in our country would come in a grade 3, 3.5. So best is to put them on a acid-free backing card, keep them in a polythene sheet.
But is it a climate-controlled room or something?
No.
Okay.
If you keep it in acid-free and you keep it moisture-proof, there are a lot of charcoal-based things which absorb the moisture. But you have to keep them very careful.
Okay. Thank you so much. Moving along to the who is as different guests from the ones that have spoken before. This is Sumit Kumar, and him I see as occupying a very amazing role as being a cusp between an artist entrepreneur. And Sumit is, from what I've observed, not a target audience for my writing, for sure. Basically, if there is something, basically Sumit has made a famous statement that he's much more into the Borat school of narratorial stewardship than the Amir Khan film, where Amir Khan is a goody two-shoes, is the best at everything. So self-seriousness doesn't go far with this gentleman. But what is absolutely beautiful about Sumit is that there is a very studied irreverence, and a continuous play between political awareness and toilet humor. Like basically Naxalbari at one end and Ichhadari Tatti at the other. So basically we are speaking about something of this sort. And there is in him a very, very strong commitment to using the slapdash, irreverent, comic, over-the-top style. This is not noir humor. That is something that has marked his work. And I wanted to actually talk to you about it because I feel specially protective of Sumit, much to his horror, I'm sure. But the reality is that somebody who goes the route of humor is always the most vulnerable person in a room. And there is a very, very simple reason for this, in my understanding, which is that people who are self-serious get quickly discarded because they're so boring. Basically, yaar, bore mat kar. But somebody who is using humor, and I fall in that category, nobody pelts me because nobody goes to the end of my books most of the time. Now, someone like Sumit, the issue is that the humor is accessible. And people understand it. तो उनको पता चल रहा है भैया क्या हो रहा है. ऊपर से तुम drawing. And that's why I wanted to ask him questions that actually discuss this thing. So between the thin skin of woke people on one end, and they are extremely thin-skinned as we all know, and the thin skin of fundamentalists, तुम्हारा काम, your work is not made extremely easy somewhere over here. So the creator of accessible humor is vulnerable. And how will you describe your readership? Like, are you protected because it's niche readership? What is going on with this? And also, your tonality has got a certain locker room, young boy, frat boy kind of energy about it. Have you seen that shifting as you reluctantly move along chronologically? Yeah, क्या हो रहा है उसमें?
तो number one तो I think I was discussing it with you also कि कॉमिक्स बनाने का फ़ायदा ये है उसको बहुत कम लोग पढ़ते हैं तो काफ़ी चीज़ें कर सकते हो तो ह्यूमैनिटी प्रोग्रेशन तो फॉर श्योर मतलब आई थिंक कि मैं पैदा गधा हुआ था जो धीरे धीरे चीज़ें सीख रहा तो एज अ बॉर्न गधा आई थिंक माई फर्स्ट वर्क इज ऑब्वियसली डम्बर एंड देन द सेकेंड वन एंड आई ऑल्सो कम फ्रॉम अ फैमिली जहाँ मतलब दूर दूर तक आर्टिस्ट राइटर सब छोड़ो मेरे फैमिली में सारे लोग या तो गुंडे हैं या पुलिस में हैं, तो बेसिकली बिल्कुल कोई डिस्कशन कभी हुआ नहीं है ऑफ एथिक्स मोरालिटी कुछ भी। तो धीरे धीरे मैंने सीखा है वो सब क्या होता है। मतलब ऑब्वियसली एज आई लर्न आई इम्प्रूव, बट आई डोंट लाइक द आइडिया ऑफ गोइंग बैक एंड फिक्सिंग माई वर्क, बट जहाँ चांस मिलता है एंड आई फील लाइक इट, आई डू इट।
Have you ever looked regret at humor that may have been funny to the inside group but caused damage to other people? Like, has there been some kind of that sort of a equation vis-a-vis your work?
All humor will cause damage to somebody.
Okay.
Humor doesn't come without a cost. So mostly that's why I do self-deprecation. But हाँ, humor हमेशा is at cost to somebody. तो for example, the political comics I write, उसमें है टारगेट जो उस टाइम उस हिस्ट्री में गधे थे, राइट। फॉर एग्जांपल कश्मीर में फारूक अब्दुल्ला गधा था उस पूरी स्टोरी में, तो उसका मजाक उड़ाया जाता है। तो ऐसे
ना मुझे आपसे ये भी पूछना पड़ेगा कि आपने काफी थीम्स एंड ये हियर टू यू हैव चोजन द रूट ऑफ ह्यूमर टू मूव अलोंग, एंड दिस ब्रिंग्स मी टू समथिंग वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग बिकॉज आई हैव बीन रीडिंग समबडी लाइक जो साको सिंस द वेरी बिगिनिंग. And while it was very, very compelling to read something like journalism or read something like, the early, Safe Area Guras, there are things like that, I found the new books impossible to get through. Like the earnestness and the research now reached such levels कि वो पढ़ ही नहीं पाते. It's very hard. So what was your, how did you work through these themes using humor, and what were the roadblocks that you met, and what was it like for you?
तो नंबर वन तो बेसिकली ये कश्मीर एंड नक्सल कॉमिक्स, बिकॉज न्यूज लॉन्ड्री वांटेड टू डू इट.
I see.
And I was really young at that time, and like a dumb donkey I said yes. And then I realized what I had said yes to. And then when I started researching, everything I've written in the book is a first reaction of somebody who's seeing it for the first time, those horrors for the first time, and somebody who's smacking his head for the first time.
Right.
So it's a book which I call like ये पहली बुक है जो आप पढ़ते हो, ये लास्ट बुक नहीं है जो आप पढ़ोगे. तो
Excellent. That's
हाँ, तो that's that. उसके अलावा
or you telling their story in that tonality?
नहीं, because I haven't done too much opinion in it. I have stuck to facts and I have played between facts and comedy.
Okay.
I haven't claimed that I know something.
My last question to you, actually, you recently went to the US and you did almost like a travel-on. So this was much more putting yourself out there with socio-cultural details. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about that? And actually, unconnectedly, इनके बहुत सारे पहलू अलग-अलग हैं. On TV, he has been in the Shark Tank. He is like an animator. He has got something called Bucker Max, which deals with web comics. So there is a lot of things that are going on. And it's one of the few people that has very proudly asserted the importance of making money being a comics creator, which is something everybody seems to pretend like they run on some fuel which is not money, So what has it been like? Unconnected questions, but any last closing words on these things?
So for the US one, I think वहाँ मेरा फेवरेट पार्ट था कि मैं एक स्ट्रिप क्लब में गया था और स्ट्रिपर से पॉलिटिक्स डिस्कस होनी शुरू हो गई और फिर मैं और वो लड़ने लगे और वो मेरे बाल नोच रही थी. मैं उस देयर आर थिंग्स आर नॉट देयर, इट्स अ रियली स्मॉल इंडस्ट्री. तो बेसिकली माय गोल इज टू गिव माई सेल्फ अ जॉब, तो आई डू वट एवर इट टेक्स टू कीप गिविंग माई सेल्फ अ जॉब. तो आई थिंक दैट्स इट.
Thank you. So I get to flip the slides, but dekh lo abhi, fill your eyes. Okay. I am leaving it to all of you to go ahead to explore their works, order them from the respective websites, wherever online. I'm sure you will do it. The next person that we're going to be speaking with is Harsho over here. Harsho and I go back a bit of a distance. Now, to me, this is probably hands down one of the most prolific comic book artists that exists in India. So much so that I actually believe that Harsho has probably collaborated with everybody under the sun. Like he has done stuff with us in the web app that we're doing. I think he's done stuff with Amar Chitrakatha. I think he's like collaborated with pretty much everybody around and many people that are not around here also. And he also has a very extremely unique style, which when it is at its best reminds me of Mad Magazine's Mort Drucker, and who used to do these fantastic film spoofs. And Harsho's style at a certain pitch always reminds me of that gorgeousness of that. And one thing about him that I'm always curious about is not just is the work very high caliber. Now whether it is your preferred style or not, that is a whole different question. But it is of a very high technical level and it is a very high volume. Like how do you pull it off? And you've got like two twins and like another woman running your life. Like how do you do this, Harsho? It just has to be asked here. You can pass on a mic that does work.
Was saying all this about me. So comics is what I love doing. So like your question was basically about how do I consist in working
How
on
do
this?
you manage high technical quality of work plus
Right.
volume? Because it is mad. The speed is mad. I don't even know how many pages you generate. in a year.
Luckily, around about now, earlier about 5 years back, I had a plan of doing roughly around 30 pages a month.
Speak up a bit, sir.
Yeah. Can the voice be heard better now? Yeah, thanks. So earlier we had a plan. I had a plan, like I have to plan roughly around 30 to 28 pages per month.
30 pages a month?
Per month. But right now, as it so happens, 60. So that's projects coming and. I'm sitting and drawing. Actually, that's what I bring a diary with me all the time to draw. Like Savio over here, so he's been drawing while he's been over here in Delhi. So that's what we artists do. We creators, who create comics. So
Yeah,
our modus
listen, you speak
operandi.
for yourself. I do one book in 4 years.
So happily, I know most of you guys out here, and I can speak for Savio, I can speak for him, I can speak for him. So we've been working together. So that field of comics is interesting because there are some people out here that I know that I've worked with before. So the field of comics is fun because it's up to us as to how we work on it and how we, tend towards going to achieving the number of pages we want. But number of pages again is dependent upon the projects we get. Like for example, when I was working with you for Optique, so that was fun because that was web comics, a different portal altogether. And the way comics has moved in recent times from being just something in print to completely out of print at times to digital domains, that's been very interesting.
Now, Harsho, the one other thing which I have to remark on is that he has got a very, very son of the soil quality about his drawing. It's very Indian comics. It's not trying to look like manga from Japan. It's not trying to look like Marvel. It's very, very off here. Like it's one of the most rooted styles that I've seen, and I think that's pretty admirable. What has been collaboration like for you with all these very many temperaments and people and different kinds of projects that you have done? And are there things that you do solo as well with the writing and text? It's mostly just art aspects.
Well, earlier I used to write and draw, simultaneously. But after a certain while, I figured out that while I'm drawing, if I want to focus on that, then I need to give the writing piece a break. So that's when I started collaborating with friends, with different houses. Like for Ramachitrakatha, we've been working together for roughly around, I think about 19 years almost. So for ACK, and for Comic Sense, I've been working for the last 3-4 years.
He's got everybody on the panel covered basically. Have you done something with Bharat as well?
No, Bharat and I, we are friends and we've known each other for a long, long time. But we haven't had a chance to work together yet. So things are still being planned. An anthology is in the works. Hope for a comic magazine, a monthly or a bi-monthly one, is in the works. But again, this is India where things fluctuate quite a lot and we don't get what we deserve and what we want.
Something that I have always noticed in your conversations has been that you seem to make a lot of excursions to do comic-related teaching in schools and amongst younger people. How one fits that with 60 pages a day, I don't even want to ask any questions about that. I mean,
a month.
Correct, okay, 60 a month. But what is this aspect of your life like? And also, a couple of questions to do with this. Now, you're working with Indian kids, I'm guessing some of them are like young teenagers?
Well, all ages actually. Basically, I start with kids who are, like my daughters, they're roughly around 8 years, they're twins.
Okay.
But they started drawing and exploring into comics when they were 3 years. 2 years. So that's the age group I start with. So I've been to different schools, I've done workshops with them. Happily in recent times there have been universities which have invited me over. So students who are learning mass comm or who are learning animation, they are getting to know about comics from me. So that's what we're trying to do, basically introduce comics as a field where you can, make a living in the end.
As someone who has observed waves and waves of younger people of a different age group, what are the roadblocks that you observe for specifically Indian artists or young people trying to do comics in India? Are you noticing a certain, like especially as somebody who has a very local flavor to their work, are you seeing roadblocks in their thought process? And what are the kind of things that younger people want to be drawing right now, writing right now?
About the Indian content, very good that you pointed it out, because right now there is an influx of manga.
Just hold the mic up, sir.
There is an influx of manga right now, and kids in schools and colleges that I've been to, for some reason they are driven quite a lot to manga, which is strange, not to DC and Marvel, but to manga. And where personally I don't have anything against manga, it's a lovely form of art. And but again, this Japanese content. If we create manga, it won't be considered as manga. So that's why I always tell them to create your own art styles, figure out your Indian content, rather than tend to what the Japanese guys are doing.
And one other thing, like I remember when I was very small and we were only reading Enid Blytons and all, which reveals to you what my demographic age group is. But the point is, we were always writing stories where women were called Emily and somebody was called Jack, and somehow when you put like a Suresh and Ramesh, it just became like a story that you didn't want to write or read, you know, and that was a kind of hideous self-wounding kind of thing that existed then. So are you seeing some of that even right now? Do the stories have some kind of a deracinated situation?
Well, depends. To the recent school and college events I've been to, the students I've interacted with, they have been quite open. So when I told them create your own character, create your own story, so they have been pretty open. So they haven't relied on what the Western world has given us. So for example, in my days, like you were talking about Tintin. So Tintin, Asterix, Archie comics, that's what we were addicted to. In fact, half the comics at a time were Phantom and Mandrake. And for some reason, I got the impression they were Indian. So at least, I think most of us thought that they were Indian also, like us. Because we were looking at their comics in Bengali, in English, in other languages as well. And we got the impression that that was the world we were living in. But things have changed. And nowadays, the influx of comics is good, but it can be a bit better as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving along, I hope that the rest of the panelists, I know it's such a long train journey over here, I hope you're filing some questions to ask each other, because I can imagine how tedious it is to just sit and wait it through. Sahitya should know that when you invite comic book artists, koi nahi bolta hai, sab aa jate hain. So maybe we should do a slightly smaller panel next time. But moving along to Raj, who likes to be called Raj. And basically, Raj is special for a very specific reason. I've been trying to get her onto this panel for the last 2 years actually, and I finally succeeded. The reason why is that Raj has written and drawn a particular illustrated work. Now, I myself, my head is boggled with terms. With the comics, graphic novel, chodo, I don't even, I'm just calling them visual stories and illustrated books and all kinds of other things now. But this particular narrative, what makes it special is that it is written in a dialect called Chota Nagpuri, which is spoken in some parts of Jharkhand, right? So it is written, conceived of, it is about that area, and it is written in Chota Nagpuri. It is about a character from that context, and here's something very beautiful. She actually taught herself to work in the local Madhubani style of artwork to draw and write this particular story. So it is pretty fantastic, and in one of her interviews, I mentioned to her outside also, see, I get very excited when I realize that now finally, जैसे कि हर social movement में ऐसे layers होते हैं कि पहले like abroad kind of situation, and then you start handing over to the people of the land, like it becomes earthier and earthier. And it has been very slow to happen in comics and graphic novels where the stories have actually been taken over from the people on the inside, जो कि अपनी मातृभाषा में कुछ लिख रहे हैं, ये बहुत कम संख्या में है लोग. इसीलिए जब हम सुनते हैं पिग फ्लिप नाम की एक कथा लिखी है ग्राफिक नॉवल, या फिर लोकेश खोटके नाम के एक हैं जनाब जो कि अभी बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग pulp fiction, very smart, thrillery kind of work that is happening entirely in Hindi. It's been written in Hindi. मुझे बहुत खुशी होती है खुद personally. So I wanted to talk to you about one specific thing. You told me, not told me, you told them that there is something about the lehza. There's a certain quality about Chota Nagpuri or the way that it is spoken that is very particular. And that when you first went to Bombay, it was almost a source of ridicule because there was no glamour associated with that kind of way of speaking. But you were always very loyal to it. You thought that there was something about it that was special, and you held on to that quality. So would you talk to me about just आप हिंदी में बात कर सकते हैं? What it's like? Just pass the moving mic along.
कॉल्ड चकमक जो एकलव्य पब्लिकेशन से निकलती है, अभी भी निकलती है। तो बच्चे की कहानी थी, बच्चे के लिए सुनानी थी, और मेरा सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक मकसद था कि मुझे ट्रुथफुल होना है। क्योंकि जब मेरे भाई ने मुझे कहानी दी, उसके 1 महीने बाद वो हमें छोड़कर चला गया। मेरे पास नहीं था वो रेफरेंस के लिए, मेरे पास नहीं था वो कि मैं उससे कुछ पूछ सकूं, उसकी कहानी जान सकूं, और मैंने उसे प्रॉमिस किया था कि इस कहानी पे मैं कुछ करूंगी। और राइट आफ्टर 1 month he was gone, so I had this huge responsibility to bring this story truthfully, as truthfully as I could.
Yeah.
So that is how I started making it. और ठीक उसके 6 महीने पहले ही मैंने मधुबनी अपने आप से ही मधुबनी सीखना शुरू किया था। एंड मधुबनी इज़ अ आर्ट फ्रॉम बिहार एंड झारखंड, तो इट फिटेड वेरी वेल एक्चुअली। और जब मेरे पास ये क्वेश्चन आया कि मैं इसको लिखूं कैसे, तो बिहार और झारखंड में एक चीज़ है जो आप पता नहीं, अगर आप उस क्षेत्र से बिलोंग करते हैं तो आप शायद जानते होंगे, और अगर नहीं करते हैं तो शायद आपने ऑब्जर्व किया होगा कि वी आर नॉट वेरी प्राउड ऑफ आवर कल्चर। पीपल फ्रॉम बिहार एंड झारखंड दे आर यूजुअली नॉट वेरी प्राउड ऑफ, और उसमें लालू यादव का हिंदी बोलना, मतलब कोई भी इंसान, चाहे वो मराठी हो, चाहे गुजराती हो, चाहे वो कहीं का भी हो, बंगाली हो, वो हिंदी अपनी मातृभाषा के टच में ही बोलता है। शुद्ध हिंदी कोई भी नहीं बोलता, पर किसी को शर्म नहीं आती, पर हमें आती है। तो हमें आती है। जब मैं दिल्ली में जॉब कर रही थी, और जब आप बोलते हो, किसी से कोई बात करते हो, और आपको कोई पहचान लेता है कि आप तो वहाँ के लग रहे हो, और वो सुनकर आपको खुशी नहीं होती, आपको दुख होता है, दैट मीन्स इट मीन्स समथिंग। And I gradually discovered this about myself, and I gradually discovered this about my family members and other friends जो कि उस एरिया से बिलोंग करते हैं, कि हमें क्यों अपनी भाषा से इतनी मुश्किल है, हमें क्यों अपनी पहचान से इतनी मुश्किल है। और जब मैं भिक्षु की कहानी लिख रही थी, तो मेरे लिए बहुत बड़ा क्वेश्चन था कि मैं इसको लिखूं कैसे, क्योंकि मैंने जब शुरू किया तो मुझे तो मेरी मातृभाषा शुरुआत में नेचुरली इट डिडंट फ्लो, it didn't come, the story didn't come in my own language, but later on I realized after a few pages कि ये मैं कर ही नहीं सकती। अगर मैं इसको शुद्ध हिंदी कर दूं तो ये कहानी मैं लिख ही नहीं सकती। मतलब ये चीज़ पहले हुई, और जैसे जैसे मैंने अपनी भाषा के साथ काम किया, तो मुझे अपनी भाषा के बारे में फिर बहुत सारी चीज़ें रियलाइज़ हुई, अपने बारे में बहुत सारी चीज़ें रियलाइज़ हुई कि अगर आप अपनी भाषा के करीब आते हो, अपनी सच्चाई के करीब आते हो, तो आपकी कहानी में जो एक इनविजिबल लेयर आता है, वो उसको यूनिवर्सल बनाता है, क्योंकि वो सच्चाई का लेयर है। आप झूठ होके यूनिवर्सल नहीं हो सकते, आपको सच होना ही पड़ेगा।
And I realized the journey and the beauty of that journey of reclaiming your own material. Yeah.
तो और वो मतलब वो हमेशा, मतलब मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अपने नज़दीक जब आप आते हो, तो जब आप आ रहे हो तो आपको नहीं पता लग सकता, वो हाइंडसाइट में ही पता लगता है।
तो मुझे आपको और एक बात पूछनी थी, जस्ट इन इंटरेस्ट ऑफ आस्किंग यू ऑल द क्वेश्चंस इन टाइम, व्हिच इज कि इंडियन ग्राफिक नॉवेल सीन में ये पहली बार नहीं है कि कोई सम स्टोरीज बीइंग टोल्ड विद अ अलायंस बिटवीन ट्रेडिशनल आर्ट फॉर्म्स एंड अ ग्राफिक स्टोरी। ओके, so for example, the most recently अपना ये जो सीता's रामायण was done in पट्टचित्र के साथ collaborate करके, there was Himayana which was done in Gond art if I'm not mistaken, yes. And one book which nobody talks about, एक गौतम भाटिया की लाय नाम की बुक थी which was done with miniature artist के साथ। लेकिन इन सब में एक कॉमनैलिटी थी that they were all very lopsided collaborations in that. I'm not dissing the books, but they were lopsided in that the artist was almost like an artisan commissioned to do it, and there was a writer who was often an urban Indian educated person who was orchestrating this whole process. So I don't know if you're familiar with these works. Other panelists can pitch in on this later on when we talk about stuff about what the politics of these kind of collaborations are versus doing it yourself.
हाँ, वही जो मतलब विकास जी ने भी जो बोला कि अगर आप उस जगह के हो, अगर आप उस भाषा को बोलते हो, अगर आप उस कल्चर के हो, तो आप बहुत सारी बातें उसमें ऐसी लेकर आते हो जो आपको, जब आप ड्रॉ कर रहे हो, जब आप लिख रहे हो, आपको पता ही नहीं होता। एंड दैट इज कॉल्ड ऑथेंटिसिटी। And when you don't know when you are being authentic, and when you push yourself to be authentic, then you become fake. So that's the difference.
Can I ask you a question? So Bhiksu was a story based in that area, and therefore you learned Madhubani. So which means if Raj writes another book, will it be in a Madhubani
Yes,
style?
it could be.
It could be. Okay.
Definitely, it could be.
Okay.
Because I am me only, so I will and I believe because I am not a very literary person. मैं बहुत पढ़ती नहीं हूँ, मैं चीज़ें देखती हूँ. मैं अगर किताब भी उठाती हूँ तो मैं किताब देखती ही रह जाती हूँ. मैं पढ़ना होता ही नहीं है मुझसे.
एक और पहलू, there's one aspect of your work which I will not talk about now, because I need to move on to the next person.
Yeah.
Is the fact that it is all very good that I'll write a book in like Dogri, and I'll write a book in like something else, but खरीदेगा कौन, छापेगा कौन, the numbers, who's going to publish it, what are the print runs, these are all insane questions. And many times the desire for authenticity is curbed because there is no way for somebody to actually publish it in a viable way. We'll get to that in our last segment when the questions are open to everybody. Moving on to wow, इसका तो मैंने कुछ भी नहीं दिखाया, seriously. देख लो भैया, these are the artworks, beautifully rendered. There is text, it flows, it follows the idiom of Madhubani. The panels are sometimes rectangular, but sometimes organic forms are used. Color coding for different characters, which is very interesting. Please buy the books. If you love art, if you like artists, kindly LibGen पे जाके PDF ना download करें. Please buy the books, buy them as gifts, do these things. Yeah. Next, I move on to Ikroop Sandhu, who I hope everybody can see. She's sitting at the corner here. And Ikroop and I are meeting for the first time. Again, another person I've been waiting to talk to. Ikroop took it upon herself, actually with conversation with Arpita of Yoda Press, to do a graphic memoir, a graphic biography of sorts of Bhagat Singh. And it was called Inqilab Zindabad. And Ikroop did this work. Now, Ikroop happens to be also from the Majha peoples of Punjab, which is the same pool of people from where Bhagat Singh emerged, for whoever loves this kind of detail, which is me. She did this in a very strange time in our collective history. She was doing this in 2019, जब तो दुनिया ही बंद पड़ गई थी. So basically, she could not even access libraries which had got materials with this stuff. Engaging with people and experts was a bit difficult. लेकिन सबसे interesting thing about Ikroop was that she did this, but there's something else which I was very intrigued by. I find in Ikroop a very great commitment to not be polarized about your feelings about subject matters. And one of the reasons why she was attracted to Bhagat Singh was because she found that he could be a bridge where the polarized meet. So, जो लोग भगत सिंह को केवल स्वतंत्रता सेनानी करके flatten करते हैं, they forget that this was a boy who died at 23, which means that he did his seminal writing and thinking at 21. Like, what are people like us doing at 20 and 21? His life's body of work, which is impressive even to read right now, was done then. And in flattening, we forget that this was a person with very open-ended opinions. It was a person who actually had communist leanings also. So there were all kinds of things which were fantastic. And Ikroop's own desire to bring complexity into the conversation attracted me about her efforts with it. I personally feel the book could have benefited from somebody else doing a typography, because I feel that the beauty of the artwork, sometimes the text gets in the way of the way it appears. It's also very hybrid. It's sometimes like regular comics, sometimes it's like an illustrated book. Alag-alag cheezein chal rahi hain. So Ikroop, just wanted to leap straight into asking you some questions about this. Clearly, your interviews indicate that you could be the bridge where the polarized meet also. You created this work at a very interesting time. Could you tell me a bit more about what it was like for you to not be taken over by some propaganda view of what Bhagat Singh looked like? Because remember, this is also a time where there was a farmers' protest going on. This is also a time where there were a lot of things going on. There were attacks on students in libraries. A lot of us were very not at peace, because it was a complex time, regardless of where you stood in your politics, right? So I want to know how you kept the nuance and complexity in telling the story of a very nuanced and complex person.
Gosh, yeah, that was, it was difficult. 2019 was when you saw students being dragged out, being beaten up in Jamia and JNU. We saw all of that very close up, and social media was like bombarding you with all these images. And that's when I had begun studying Bhagat Singh, and it felt like nothing had changed. They were doing this to students then, they're doing it to students now. So Bhagat Singh was a student at the time when he was basically hanged. And he was a student leader and he was an organizer. So somewhere I just empathized with that student who was being beaten up. And I had to find the voice of that person through Bhagat Singh. And I was like, okay, how do we now make the majority of the people who are calling them Tukde Tukde gang and kind of completely dismissing them as anti-national? How do I change that? But because Bhagat Singh was also called a terrorist and he was also called anti-national at one point by different leaders of whether it was the Indian National Movement, Congress leaders, etc. So I was like, this is the same, similar kind of a reflection, and it's been almost 100 years. So I kind of gone through the lens of only presenting the student's point of view and not Bhagat Singh's point of view. Bhagat is that bridge, like I said, left and the right both want to appropriate him because he stood for the best things that we wish to see in the world. And just getting his writings out and letting people read most of that stuff that we actually don't know he wrote about, being an atheist, being a communist, willingly being hanged, not asking for clemency, denying mercy.
Actually, one detail is that he asked for a firing squad because he said that that's what soldiers should die like, and not with being hanged like some thief or like some criminal.
Yeah.
It was gorgeous. I mean, that was his wish, not of letting him go and maaf kar do over here.
Incredible. And you saw that being echoed in the students in 2019, and now like their spirit has been pretty much destroyed, but there is still hope and sparks of using Bhagat's writing or his life and kind of reminding people who we are as a nation and what should we expect of this country. So, and the farmers' protest was the perfect, it was sad that it happened, but it was the perfect fuel for a perfect storm inside me, where I was being introduced to an ideology which I had kind of overlooked, and I was getting radicalized just reading Bhagat Singh and watching the farmers' protest. And I realized that we need to bring in Bhagat even to understand the farmers' protest, because the context of it is still Pagdi Samhal Jatta happened over a century ago, and the same thing is happening now with the farmers' protest. And where have we gone wrong in all of those years? It's absurd. So that is that's what kept me, fueled.
How long did you take to finish the work?
It took me about 2 years.
And you mentioned that you drew and wrote the work.
Yes. Yeah.
With editorial freedom on both, or was the writing co-written with Yoda since they had commissioned the work?
Not really. So they were fantastic. They kind of let me have a go at it, and they helped me edit it, but I was pretty much given the free run of writing, which was super exciting.
So, what is to me very interesting is this thing about whether a character is appropriated by both sides. Now, there are two things, just like the thin skin of the woke and the thin skin of the fundamentalist. Similarly, there is the issue of somebody who you think was a fine chap being appropriated by somebody you don't like. But there is the other issue of somebody being blanked out of the face of books and history and everything because the other person doesn't like them. So it's kind of an interesting negotiation with what happens with stories and why it is so important that all kinds of people tell stories. एक किस्म का story teller नहीं होना चाहिए कभी भी किसी भी चीज के बारे में, regardless of the politics. I think it should be.
Yeah. This was actually the point that you're bringing up is, Arpita offered me Bhagat Singh. She said, you should write a book about Bhagat Singh. I was like, I don't want to write a book about a man. There are so many stories about men, heroes, etc. No. She said, okay, just read. Why don't you read him, read his writings, and then come back to me. And I read his writings and I said, frankly, there aren't many women who've written about him. And this is my chance to change the lens of how we are viewing him. And recently I was narrating it on Instagram. There was a podcast reel that was made and it went viral. And I could see that because it's a woman narrating the last days of Bhagat Singh, the number of women in the comments fighting, disagreeing with fundamentalists or leftists was much larger than I had assumed. And I felt that I was being the bridge for the women who probably who hadn't associated or hadn't thought that they should have opinions about it, or had opinions, were hesitant about sharing them openly. I feel like something opens up when you change the people who tell the stories.
On that beautiful note, moving along to Bharat.